Pardon the interruption, I'm Chris Gehrz. Sam, big news from Comic-Con. Batman is going to be in Man of Steel 2. Thoughts?
Chris, no time for thoughts. The message boards are blowing up. Welcome to PTI, boys and girls. I'm Sam Mulberry. Chris, last night we both simultaneously were grading exam 2. What are your observations from the first exam?
Improvement. I feel like my average for my group of students went up about 5 points from the first exam, which, actually that's fairly similar to what we normally see in face-to-face. You get a little more accustomed to how the test is going to work. I think it's a different kind of accustoming. Last time, I think we were doing the post-exam 1 webisode, we talked a lot about time management. People seem to figure it out.
That seemed a lot better.
Yeah, essays were a lot longer, and it seemed like everyone left at least 15 to 25 minutes for them. And yet objectives didn't really fall off a lot, so I feel like people are better prepared too.
Right. And I think part of it is just having seen an exam. I mean, this exam looked enough like the first one where you're not surprised by, even if we tell you, here's what the question types are going to be, until you see them, it's hard to really know that.
Well, and the only change we made was, we put in the 4 quick questions about the sacraments, partly to give people some time. You only had to write 2 pairs of significance. Well, I have to say, a few people wrote all 3, which is fine, except I'm only going to grade the first 2, and that takes up time for other things. So read instructions carefully when we tell you pick 2 of 3.
Mm-hmm. I also noticed, and this is not surprising, that when we got into looking at the connections between terms, this is sort of a warning for the third exam, that you had to dig a little deeper. I mean, in Unit 1, because we're talking about one time period, some of those connections are the people are connected a lot more closely. So if you're talking about Socrates and Plato, it's easier to make that connection. When you're talking about Benedict and Francis, you need to dig a little deeper to think about, well, how are they related, other than they both started monastic orders? But what else is there that's going to connect those?
Yeah, and looking ahead a little bit to the third exam, because that's coming up in less than a week from when this webisode airs. You've got a couple of units to review. Expect, we'll probably have a couple of Enlightenment, Scientific Revolution, modern people connected to each other. We'll probably make you do at least one connection back towards something else. So that's part of the review. I'll say essays I was really happy with. Not just the length, but generally people did a good job of trying to incorporate details. It worked better in some cases than others, but everyone seemed better prepared for them. And I think one thing to notice is the units are getting shorter, and there are fewer theme questions as well, and that was an intentional choice. And so the third unit study guide is up. Take a look. There are only 3 theme questions. Now, 2 of them are pretty broad questions, but you should be pretty well prepared, because one of those in some form is going to show up as the essay on the third exam, and you should be pretty set to go with ideas of how you'd like to answer it. Sam, speaking of the third unit, it is pretty compressed. We only have 2 museums, 2 films. We will have 2 webisodes, but then right to the test. Any thoughts about how to adapt to that? How it might feel different?
Well, I think just knowing that the turnaround time is quicker, it's important to stay on top of the material, and not just stay on top, meaning get your assignment done.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're looking at those museums, going through that stuff, make sure you're taking notes with your eye on the exam. Make sure you're thinking about those theme questions. I'm not sure how people have been studying for the course, but I wouldn't push those off till right before the exam. That exam also doesn't come right after a weekend either. So that's another big thing to think about, is you're not going to have that 2-day break to be preparing for that. So.
Yeah, but it also will be a little bit more cumulative. You've just studied for the second exam, and when you're doing that, you're studying review stuff from the first. So hopefully at least at this point, you should probably have a good handle on Aristotle, Augustine. You probably are familiar with Luther. So, that takes a little less. That's just fresh.
How do you think a student should study for the cumulative element of the course?
I think one of the theme questions points at it. It has the contrast of, take these big questions of the class. Who am I? Who should I be? Who am I in relation to others? How do you answer those questions? We've kind of queued you up. How would your kind of average high medieval person answer? I think we tell you, be prepared at least for 2 of them. Answer, who am I supposed to be? How would a Protestant reformer answer that? And then how would someone from the Enlightenment, a deist, someone like Voltaire or Franklin or Montesquieu or Locke, how would they answer that question? So I think that's probably a good place to start, because that forces you to think back cumulatively at least to the second unit.
Yeah, I think another way to do it as well is to think about what's the big picture story, right? And I think we talked about this a lot towards the end of the Middle Ages, thinking about the Martin Buber epics of homelessness and habitation. If you can tell the story from ancient Greece up through the end of this unit in terms of homelessness and habitation, that's going to set you up to think kind of broad culturally, what are the lenses people are looking through. I think that helps you jump into the worldview of different people, to kind of make sense out of them.
And I think just as a preview, the last museum will push us forward into the 19th, a little bit into the 20th century. So in some ways, it's going to be a little bit more like the first museum. It's kind of a scattershot, a few topics. But we also will start with kind of a narrated PowerPoint reviewing this idea of habitation homelessness to push us into then what the modern habitation would look like. So, both as we're kind of pushing ahead a little bit towards later courses you'll take in the Gen Ed curriculum, we're also doing some review to kind of give you that big picture. So use that maybe to help frame your cumulative part of studying.
Chris, getting into what we've looked at so far in this unit, I know that this is one of your least favorite eras in history. With that in mind, what do you like about the Enlightenment?
It's a toss-up between the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. For the eras in history, I dislike the most.
Well, what's interesting is those are really important eras in the history of Europe. And what is your field?
Well, it's 20th century European history.
So we take the 20th century up. European history.
But you'll actually see this in that last museum. It'll close with an exhibit on World War I. And a lot of what that museum is kind of thinking, should we, actually the film and the museum for the modern age, how optimistic should we be about what humans can do by their own initiative? And in some ways, there's good reason to be optimistic. In other ways, what we're seeing in the 19th, 20th century and the 18th is kind of puncturing that. I will say, because this is really where the next film is going to start up, I think we should be wary of the Enlightenment, to echo what a couple of our profs who we interview would say. At the same time, there's some really important things coming out of it. And one that I think will come out in the film that I'd like to underscore is the idea of religious toleration. A big theme of the last unit was the cure worse than the disease? Was all that division and violence worth it? I'm a Protestant, so I guess at the end of the day I'm with Luther on the Reformation. I also totally understand Voltaire's point of view. Why did a quarter of the population of Germany have to die? And even if it's not just about religion, that's a factor. And it seems so natural to us that you would just tolerate religious difference. At the same time, toleration is a really problematic concept because that implies you can take a very patronizing attitude. Well, I'll put up with your eccentricities and tolerate the fact that you believe in God or something. I actually think the more important takeaway is the separation of church and state. And think back to the very first movie we watched, and the movie about the Constantine and Augustine. Think about how many professors were really nervous about this fusion of church and state and civil religion. Civil religion is a major, major idea for people like Rousseau and for other Enlightenment thinkers. It fits really well with deism, this kind of generic sort of theistic thing where it doesn't really matter what you believe as long as you can hold a few things in common. That's not Christianity. That's certainly not what, as a pietist, I would say Christianity. It's a change of heart. It's a change of affections. It's a change of life. It's an orientation towards God and it's love of God and it's love of neighbor. And so when you start saying religion is the civil kind of thing that undergirds the state and helps remind us that we're citizens of the state, to an extent, okay, but don't confuse that for Christianity. And I'm happy to see established, powerful state churches go away. Those are the ones that deaden religion, and they're the ones that tend to persecute people like the Anabaptists and the Quakers and people who seem off on the margins. So, religious liberty, religious toleration, but even more separation in church and state, I really, really appreciate from the Enlightenment. Sam, thinking back to earlier in the course, you, or at least your head on a stick that I was talking about, said that Pascal was in your cloud of witnesses. Now, I put those words in your mouth. Would you actually agree with that? And if so,
absolutely, yeah.
Why is Pascal in your cloud of witnesses?
I'm really drawn to people who sort of live with internal conflicts. And Pascal is one of those people who's alive at a really interesting moment in time. As much as we think about epics of homelessness as being uncomfortable to live in, they're also sort of historically exciting times. We talked before about sort of this kind of the contesting of ideas, right? I think in the last film we talked about how in epics of homelessness there's different ideas vying to be that organizing principle. And Pascal's alive during one of those times. He's also somebody who understands the time he's living in, right? This idea of, thinking about the scientific revolution is in full swing by the time we get to Pascal in the mid-17th century. And he understands what the sort of shift that's happening in astronomy and other sciences, what that means to how we think about who we are as human beings. And there's a degree to which he embraces it as this is a science is this search for truth, right? I mean, he's a scientist and mathematician, but at the same time, as a person of faith, he realizes there's conflicts in this, that we need to sort of tread lightly, or we need to be afraid of potentially afraid of what this means. My favorite quote from Pascal, one of them, he's a really quotable guy, is the silence of these infinite spaces terrify me, right? As he thinks about, if we're not this closed cosmos with Earth at the center, but we're this infinite universe that seems to go on forever, that there's something about that's kind of terrifying, right? And so he embraces that. I find that really interesting. I also find in the reading we had from Pascal, his sort of struggle with faith and reason. I like that to him it's not a clean, easy answer, right? It's really easy, I think, for some philosophers to kind of talk about, well, faith and reason need to work together. They need to be the best of friends, or faith perfects the work that reason begins. I mean, from someone like Aquinas, we get a really nice, orderly answer to this, right? And I feel like Pascal is really wrestling with it and trying to say we need to hold both of these. And he's living at a time where faith and reason are in conflict. Right? And he's saying, but we need to find a way to do that because he sees value in both of those. F. Scott Fitzgerald once said that the sort of mark of a particular kind of genius is the ability to hold two conflicting ideas in your mind at the same time and not go crazy. And to me, Pascal is one of those, and he's a model of that. I love to look at that reading. And then the last thing about Pascal, is his sort of focus on the idea that the heart is an organ through which we feel God. Right, that the time he's living in the scientific revolution, living in the Enlightenment, it's all about the mind, all about the reason, right? That's how we know truth. And Pascal is saying, but there's another way that we know things, that we feel things, right? That the heart is really central to Pascal. And to me, that's something that I'm really drawn to, because I feel like as I think about my own faith, that there's so many things it's hard for me to rationalize, to articulate, to put into words, that I almost feel like I kill them when I put them into words, but there's something that I feel very deeply, and that's what it feels like Pascal is talking about. He says to get rid of those things is to kill religion, is to kill faith, right? And that's an important thing. But at the same time, to only live by that and to eschew reason doesn't make any sense either, because we live in a world where reason really works, right? And God has endowed us with both of those. God has endowed us with faith and reason.
You convinced me.
All right. Chris, as we're thinking about the scientific revolution, moving into the Enlightenment, we're sort of seeing the rise of science and mathematics, things like that. How does that interact then with the liberal arts, both historically and thinking about a place like Bethel?
Well, I think what you said about Pascal, really, especially the second point you made about this ability to hold things in tension, I think fits really nicely. I think in the film, someone even said Pascal is this really Bethel-y kind of figure. And I think, why do you come to a place like Bethel? If you're a Christian, you want to go to a Christian institution. There are other kinds of institutions that would be happy to draw nice, clean lines and very orderly systems. Bethel embraces the liberal arts, which, if nothing else, are designed to help you hold ideas in tension. To see things from other points of view, to understand where the gray areas are and how you live in those tensions. And I think it's useful then to understand that this happens even in the sciences. And this is why I think Pascal is such a really influential figure for a number of our science and math faculties. It can seem like the sciences, mathematics, are the one place in a Christian university where here we've got laws of nature, and here's where you've got clarity. But I think they even recognize that there's some fuzziness there. Now, the reason I was actually thinking about this is, as somebody who does history, we're kind of in this middle of this period where it seems like history, English, philosophy, number of majors is declining, professors are being laid off at places, and so there's a lot of talk about how the humanities are in crisis. And I think sometimes we stop saying the humanities and we say the liberal arts are in crisis. And so it's good for me to remember liberal arts include sciences and math. At least going back to the Renaissance and really even deeper to the Middle Ages, where like arithmetic and geometry and astronomy are three of the basic liberal arts. That this is all part of the well-rounded general education that the liberal arts are trying to do. And much as I love studying history, I shouldn't just study the past and how humans interact with each other. It's valuable for me to have my mind stretched to think about laws of nature, to think about mathematical principles. And it helps me be a better thinker, helps me communicate better. As a Christian, because I think we do Christian liberal arts, not just liberal arts, it also helps me understand God better. and kind of my position in the universe. It's a good reminder that I'm just one piece of creation. I've got a responsibility to the rest of creation as a steward of it. So I've just been thinking a lot about this the last 2 weeks, and then happened, we're talking about the scientific revolution, and saw some like Wade Nyworth, an inorganic chemist, talking about science, but also, as part of his interview, you've seen him talking about medieval mysticism and Martin Luther, and he talks about literature in the interview. And so it made me appreciate again the importance of the people who teach science and math here, but also those fields in the kind of education that you're getting at Bethel.
All right, it's back by popular demand. Heads on Sticks. We haven't done this in a
Please
in a
stop
few
sending
episodes.
emails.
That's right. We are giving you Heads on Sticks. Chris, you're up first.
Okay, Sam, who am I?
You are Sir Isaac Newton.
Oh, good day.
All right. So we heard in the last film that in the 100, Michael Hart ranked you second. The second most important person in history, behind Muhammad, but ahead of Jesus. So, Isaac Newton, are you bigger than Jesus?
I've heard that somewhere before. I'll stop doing a British accent
Thank
now
you.
and adopt an American accent for you all. I'm quite a gifted voice actor. Am I bigger than Jesus? Let me qualify this by saying that I've got fairly unconventional ideas about who Jesus was. I don't believe you've heard about this so far, but while I study theology a lot, I'm probably more of an Arian Christian who does not believe that Jesus actually was the Son of God. I don't believe in the Trinity. So I'm really a Unitarian, I think would be the best way to think about me. But that being said, I understand that Jesus is a very important figure in our faith and in the history of Western civilization. And so I'm humbled to be exalted above Jesus as number 2. So I don't feel like it's my place to say I'm all that great. But if you were to make the case that I'm the second most important person in history, it does seem like I've read the mind of God in some small way. There seems to be something about the idea that gravity works everywhere you can possibly imagine and explains something as basic as motion itself. That seems like a pretty big deal. It feels like Alexander Pope was going a little overboard when he said that God said, let me be, and all was light. But think about if you can do that with gravitation, with laws of motion, maybe we can do that for some other things. And some of the people who are following me, maybe they can try to do that for society, for economics, for politics. And in that case, that has a lot of promise to it. That does seem like we can better understand the universe, but also maybe we can harness it, and not just for technological change, but we can do social reform. I would also say that I'm an unorthodox Christian, but I am a Christian. I believe in God, and I don't actually believe God is a distant watchmaker. Some of my followers have gone in this direction. I believe God does occasionally intervene and wind up the watch, so to speak, and I believe in miracles. And so I feel like maybe we can push what I'm saying, the Principia, a little bit too far, but I guess that makes it significant as well.
All right, Chris, who am I?
You are Sir Francis Bacon. Sir Francis. Is your piece on the 4 idols the most confusing page and a half in the entire CWC reading packet?
I would say that anybody who says that mine is the most confusing piece in the packet hasn't really looked at Hildegard of Bingen very closely, because that stuff's pretty weird, right? I think next to that, my essay is pretty straightforward. Really, all I'm thinking about is, what are those things that we have in us culturally, that we have in us as human beings, that get in the way of our ability to ask questions, and more importantly, to answer those questions, right? So what are the idols that provide answers for us, right? I think religion, the way we practice religion, is one of those types of things, right? That if we take what Christianity, for example, tells us, just take it at face value and don't ask questions about it, right? That means that if we're not allowed to ask questions, then that means that we're not allowed to do real scientific discovery and exploration, right? Because we just take those answers without exploring them ourselves, right? I think language has limitations, right? Language serves as a kind of idol that we're sort of sometimes trapped in by language. And I think science and mathematics, one of the powers of something like mathematics and empirical science, is it lets us get outside of language and ask some of those questions, right? So I think my piece is actually fairly straightforward and sort of fits with the time, I wrote a lot of stuff. I wrote most of the works of Shakespeare, as it turns out.
Really? Are you getting royalties for that?
No, but I'm talking to my lawyers later this afternoon.
Okay. Sam, who am I?
You are Benjamin Franklin.
My, I've got great hair.
All
I
right.
enjoy this a lot.
So, in your essay, you said that there are really only 5 principles to religion, 5 basic principles to religion. If we could narrow that down to a top 4, like which 2 would be in the play-in game to make the top 4?
Sure, yeah, I feel like I can explain on behalf of the selection committee some of the criteria we have. Let's start with what I said in the essay. These seem to be the essentials that all religions esteem. Now, I'm living in the 18th century, don't know a lot about Eastern religions, and so I might acknowledge now that Buddhism doesn't especially have the idea of God that we do in the Abrahamic tradition. But I think it seems that's probably number 1, right? The top number 1 seed is that God exists. I know that my good friend Baron Dolbach over in France is gone off the deep end into atheism. It seems to me he's being unreasonably divisive on this. It seems like we can agree that there is a higher force, a supreme being, something beyond ourselves. And that seems like a pretty reasonable thing to believe. My predecessor, Descartes, said that this is one of the 2 things that he thought he can kind of get to just by sheer reason, by deduction. The other was that the soul is immortal, which I think is my 4th principle. And this is interesting because it seems like we're people of science, right, Sam?
Sure.
Yeah, we believe in the clarity of reason and empirical validation of these principles, and yet I don't think we can really do that with the soul. I don't think there's an experiment or a dissection we can do. And yet, I think that we can follow a deductive, I forget if you call it a chain or a cable, a chain, right? And that leads us to the idea that the soul is more, there's something beyond this world. I mean, it seems like this goes all the way back to Plato, and we can maybe agree to that. Then we're into other things. And, remember, another of my criteria was that religion should improve individuals, should improve societies. And so I think it's pretty important to understand that, the 3rd principle is that the best way to serve God, not necessarily by worship, but by serving others, by doing good to people. I think that's really important if we're thinking about the instrumental benefits of religion. It makes us better people. As a deist, that's actually maybe practically, functionally, the most important thing, is it actually makes us better. And then we're into the kind of play-in game. I mean, we're left with this idea that God doesn't just exist, but he made the universe and really controversially governs it in some way. And then the final one, that there's an afterlife where virtue is rewarded and vice is punished. And here, this is kind of tough. I feel like at the end of the day, maybe I'm going to hold on to number 5 more, because if I think that it's important that we do good, maybe we need that kind of incentive, disincentive, that carrot and stick, even beyond this world. Maybe you got away with living a really bad life in this world. I need to believe that there's something out there, to punish or to reward, to punish you if you didn't live so well. And so maybe I don't really like, preachers talking about hell and fire and brimstone. I don't like Calvin's idea of double predestination. I do like the sense that you're going to be held accountable. As to God governing the world, here's where deists were a little bit unsure. Some of us really think God is just this watchmaker who winds her up, lets her go, and he's off doing something else. If I'm saying he governs, I believe at least in some sense of providence is a word a lot of our founding fathers are using in this new United States. Some sense that God, at least at some level, is actively looking out for us. And I feel like that's a little bit more controversial. So if I had to pick, that's probably my last one in our bracket.
And it's reasoning like that that's made you one of our greatest American presidents. Thank you for joining us.
I am honored on your behalf.
Chris, who am I?
You are Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary, what are you more proud of, writing The Vindication of the Rights of Women or the fact that your daughter wrote Frankenstein?
Well, Frankenstein's really had legs. There's been lots of film versions of it.
Speaking of royalties, are you getting residuals on that?
Well, I'm not, and that's okay. Part of the problem, right? I mean, there's lots of film versions. I'm a big young Frankenstein fan. Mm-hmm. But the second piece of news coming out of Comic-Con is that Catherine Bigelow has optioned the script for The Vindication of the Rights of Women.
No!
Yeah, it's going to be big.
Awesome.
So Jennifer Lawrence has been attached. So watch for this in the summer of 2015.
Okay.
All right. But seriously, I really think that The Vindication of the Rights of Women is a significant piece, right? Because what I'm trying to do is to situate women and the plight of women in the language of the Enlightenment. Right, we have people out there who are talking about how the state of women in society is something that's biological, right? That we're somehow sort of physically different, which we are, but that leads to us having diminished capabilities for reason and things like that. And reason is the currency of the Enlightenment, right? And all I'm trying to say is that women are endowed with reason to the same degree that men are endowed with reason. What it is there are societal structures that don't allow us to cultivate that reason, to develop that reason. And that keeps us in sort of a second-class role, a second-class situation. So what we need is for the people in charge of society, for men in charge of society, to snap those chains, those things that bind us and keep us from being able to use our reason, to cultivate our reason, to get the kind of education that would allow our reason to grow and develop. And if they did that, they would find that not only were we better at the things that we're currently doing, but we're actually capable of doing all these other things. And ultimately what it means is that we're better people, we're better citizens, and together we're a better society. So I don't see Frankenstein doing that.
No, I do think Frankenstein, your daughter does a nice job pointing to some of the tensions of coming out of the scientific revolution, in the sense that we can maybe play God, and that maybe there are some inherent limitations to what science is able to accomplish. But we should probably ask her that, and not you.
Fair enough.
Okay. Sam, who am I?
You are the new baby from Will and Kate, and since we don't actually have a photo of the baby, who as of this recording is not yet named, I just use the E-Trade baby, because that's sort of the closest thing we have to American royalty.
How would I know?
All right, so new royal baby.
Yep.
The great bard William Shakespeare once said that all the world is a stage and the people merely players. Or maybe Francis Bacon said that. I'm not sure. Walt Whitman said that the powerful play goes on and you must contribute a verse. What verse are you going to contribute to this grand story of Western civilization?
Boy, I don't know. That's a lot to put on at this point, 2-day-old baby, Sam. And by the way, that's very impressive, showing off of your knowledge of literature. But I would say what I have to contribute is maybe a popularizing of the monarchy, bringing it down so that it's a little bit less distant from the good people of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I feel like I probably need to have a reality show. I probably should be followed throughout my life by documentary cameras and find out I'm just like everyone else. Sure, my crib is fashioned out of gold. Sure, I mean, I think everyone's is, or at least silver, right? This is how it works.
Yeah, one of the lesser metals. Yeah.
Exactly. Sure, everyone vacations around the world, and everyone's got a castle, right? Or at least a timeshare castle, I think. I feel like, the people find out we're not that much different, you and I. Or, I'm sorry, you and we. I forget, we don't say I, do we? What I probably have to get over is this idea that somehow my birth is really all that important. I mean, top 5, sure. But, Jesus was born. That's pretty important, right, Sam?
Yeah, yeah.
Like the modern age was born. That was pretty important, right? I'm maybe 3rd, right?
So are you ushering in a new epic of habitation with you as our organizing principle?
Again, this is a lot to bear for a baby. Let me give you some time to think about this. But I feel like maybe the problem is that we've got Twitter out there. Like I heard that there was all this tweeting going on. I mean, if Twitter had been around for like the birth of Christ, I'm sure it would have been off the charts, or at least kind of in the neighborhood of what happened with me. I'll go that far.
All right. See, aren't you glad we did Heads and Sticks again? That was pretty fun.
I'm going to miss this. Do we only have one webisode left?
We do.
Oh, my goodness. It's happy time. Happy birthday to Oscar-winning actors both, I think. Kevin Spacey turns 54 today, and Sandra Bullock turns 49. Sam, would you rather see the Isaac Newton story starring Kevin Spacey or Sandra Bullock is Mary Wollstonecraft?
That's an easy one for me. I'm going to go with the Isaac Newton story starring Kevin Spacey.
What if it were a musical, just like the one with...
Beyond the Sea?
Yeah.
Yikes. Wow, that shows how little I like Sandra Bullock, that I would still go see that, and I hated most of Beyond the Sea. Although Kevin Spacey was very good in it, but it was very vain. The whole project was very vain.
Absolutely true.
All right, happy anniversary to the Central Intelligence Agency. On this day in 1947, President Harry Truman signed an act of Congress that created the CIA. Chris, you just watched Argo again. Now that the Oscar buzz has died down, does it hold up, or is Affleck a hack?
It held up surprisingly well. I remember sitting in the theater and really enjoying it, but partly it's just that my wife and I, with 3-year-old twins, get to so few movies. Maybe it was just like the emotion overcame me or something. And so I watched like all the accolades pile up, and I thought, this is still G-League guy, right? This is still Ben Affleck, and I thought maybe if I watch this again, it doesn't hold up. And we got it, and on a smaller screen, stuck at home with the kids interrupting, it was still kind of a taut, old-fashioned thriller, leavened by comedy about kind of 70s era, late 70s, early 80s kind of Hollywood feel. Have you seen Argo?
I did. I saw it pretty soon after it came out in the theaters, and it's one of those funny things with historical movies, like what the ending is, right? Yeah. And I was sweating until the plane got off the ground. I know that they get out. That's why I know that it's a nice piece of filmmaking when you know where it's going and you still have the tension and anxiety.
Well, I think what it speaks to is something you and I talk a lot about, which is craft. I mean, this is not reinventing movies. I don't think there's any grand philosophical thing at stake here. It's just a really well-made movie. But I think we both have come to appreciate, partly just from teaching, getting reps in with our own craft, the value of knowing how to make a movie well.
Right.
So I'm impressed by that. Happy trails to Robert Todd Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln's son died this day in 1926. He was in the area not only for his father's assassination, but for those of James Garfield and William McKinley in 1901. So, which is the worst Illinois curse? This guy or the Billy Goat who has afflicted the Cubs these many years?
1906 was the last time the Cubs won? 1908.
1908.
1908. That's a long time. But this guy was around for the deaths of 3 presidents. And you know what? You could say, well, he was there and other people were there, so that's an airtight alibi. But do you know who has airtight alibis? Murderers have airtight alibis. I think we should reopen this case.
Wow. We're going to hear from all sorts of lawyers on this episode. But thanks, Sam, for those thoughts.
I never saw the movie Lincoln, so maybe they covered that.
So, Sam, any final thoughts as we wrap up this penultimate webisode and we move into the last theme of the course?
Write us in if you have questions. I think this should be pretty exciting stuff. I know students tend to get excited as we move closer to periods in history that they're familiar with.
American history.
Yes, as we were working on the last museum, I mean, we're going to get into looking at the First World War. We're going to be looking at Christianity in America. So, we're going to be looking at some things that actually connect. Everything we've talked about in this course, I would argue, connects with the world you live in. But you're going to feel some of those connections a little bit more.
And look in the museum. We're going to have ads for classes that you can take. So especially if you're a first, second year student, this is a prerequisite for other classes. So it's a chance, even for the fall, maybe you're looking to shift your schedule, some classes to check out, including one that we teach in Europe coming up again in 2015. I'd also say, in the next webisode, just to preview a little bit, we'll talk about the exit interview. You focus on the test, but you do have one final assignment due on August 5th. And so in the next webisode, we'll talk a little bit more about that and what we're going to expect from that, what to prepare for it. But basically, it's your chance to share what you thought of the material, but also the course itself. So we'll talk about that on our last webisode.
Wow, will it end with a cliffhanger?
That's right. What's going to happen?
Are you going to say goodnight, Sweden?
I was going to let you do that.